Hi, 310 students. We're going to do history via video. And I'm going to go pretty quickly because I know there's 2 more videos I have for you to watch on history, and they're already kind of long. So I'm going to pull up the slides, PowerPoint slides. These are on Canvas. And hang on, I didn't pull up the right ones. Try that again. Okay. So, okay, so this material is in your book, and you want to pay attention to answering those reading questions as we go. I'm going to try and tell fewer stories so we can get through this. Socrates, Plato. We kind of put them together because Socrates never wrote anything down. Plato did. And so Plato's earlier writings are assumed to be Socrates' ideas, and then maybe later they turn into Plato's ideas. But they're both Greek philosophers. And what I want you to know about these 2 guys is they are what we would call nativists. A nativist is somebody, I believe this was one of your questions, who thinks that you're born with some stuff. They thought that you're born with knowledge. In fact, it was divinely given that there is such a thing as a soul, and that information is in you. And all you have to do is have education, ask a student questions over and over until they discover what they already knew. So the nativist, though, when we think about what is mind, a nativist would say, well, mind is something that is already in there when you're born. Okay, some kind of consciousness, soul, something like that. So that is the idea you want to be able to connect to these 2 names. Now, Aristotle was a student of Plato's, and here's his mugshot. He, on the other hand, was an empiricist, and he believed that what we know, knowledge, comes from what we experience. And we experience, the world, how? Through our sensory systems. Think about what are your 5 major sensory systems. You see, hear, touch, taste, smell. That was it, right? 5. And all that incoming information is what we turn into knowledge. So it's pretty opposite of what the nativists would say. Now, Aristotle's notable because instead of just using pure logical reasoning to get to truth or knowledge, he emphasized the importance of observation. So he often used observations of the natural world as evidence for his ideas. So he was much more toward the scientific method that we use today, because science really involves both observation, systematic observation, careful observation, with the rational logic to come to conclusions. So it's like logic plus observation. Now, Socrates and Plato were all about just logic. In fact, they said you can't trust your sensory systems, so all truth and knowledge come from just logical reasoning. Aristotle did logical reasoning, but he added observation to it, and that's much more like what we do today. Scientific method is essentially systematic observations plus logic. So we love Aristotle. Now, he's also suggested a number of things that later became known as the laws of associationism. And we'll get to those in a few slides. So let's just say, give him credit for coming up with the stuff about how we learn, and I'll tell you what those are later. So in the directed notes, here was your question. So you should be able to answer that because I just told you the answers 30 seconds ago. All right. Descartes. Now, I'm never going to test you on years, but look how far we jumped. We were like 350, 500 years BCE to the 1600s. That's because not a lot happened in between. After the Greeks came the Romans, and then the rise of Christianity in that area of the world, and the church pretty much said no to anything that questioned church doctrine. So there were people that kind of kept the Greek ideas alive and tried to make them fit with church ideas, but not a lot of new stuff happened as far as psychological thought during that time. So we jump to Descartes. What do we want to know about him? Well, he's a dualist, and I want you to know what that means. Essentially, it means there are 2 things, excuse me, a mind and a body. Sort of like a brain and a mind, like there are these 2 things. Socrates and Plato were also dualist, Aristotle was more a monist. There's one thing, which is body, because Aristotle wrote about that the soul is so much entwined with the body. When the body dies, essentially the soul's gone. It is not something that transcends the physical body, where Socrates, Plato, and now Descartes did believe that. They thought there was some other thing. Now, Descartes even thought that the soul or mind interacted with the physical body through a structure he called the conarium, and we call it now the pineal gland. It's pretty obvious from his drawings and description what he was talking about. He also talked about behavior having two kinds. Voluntary behavior, that's like free will and choices we make, and only humans have that. And involuntary behavior, which is simply reflexes, and all animals have that as well as humans. Now, this is going to be something we talk about in classical conditioning, is reflexes and how we build on those to get more complex behavior. He was a nativist. He also thought that mind had not all knowledge, but we were born with some knowledge. So he goes into the nativist camp, not the empiricist camp. Okay. So we'll talk about this one. Maybe we'll give a few minutes when we get back to see each other in person and talk about number 4. Do bring your notes to class next time. Okay. Hobbes. We like Hobbes for one reason. The philosophers, now notice we've only talked about philosophers so far. They're thinking about mind and psychology and behavior, but very much thinking that there couldn't be a science of this. So Descartes talking about voluntary behavior, free will, choices. And he thinks this really just stays under the realm of philosophy. How can you study? How can you know what someone's going to do or choose? Well, turns out actually we're pretty good at predicting sometimes what people will do. And so Hobbes noticed this. He said, you know, the mind can produce voluntary behavior, what looks like choice, in pretty predictable, regular ways, like a reflex, which means we could probably study it. So he's really bringing the mind into the realm of scientific study. He's also known for hedonism, which to put in a shortcut way would be we seek pleasure and we avoid pain. So that would be like one rule of voluntary behavior. People are going to do things to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Guess what? That's pretty much how we do operate. And that idea will keep coming up for a couple more people that we talk about. So now we have Locke. Let's see the dates. He does overlap Hobbes. Hobbes is English, Locke is English. And he's known, he talked about this blank slate thing, the idea that when you're born, your tabula rasa would be a blank slate. Now that was an Aristotle's idea, and that once you're born, you got no knowledge, and then everything comes through experience. So he also is an empiricist. And there were a whole group of philosophers that fell under this camp of empiricism. And one of the things they did is they talked about laws of associationism. So back on Aristotle's slide, I said, oh yeah, he started this. He didn't call it laws of associationism, but the ideas were there. And the British empiricists just expanded on it and talked about Aristotle's ideas. Here were 3 of Aristotle's ideas. Associationism is associating things. So our mind will put things together. Now they talked about simple ideas. That is the raw data from your sensory systems, things you see, things you hear, what you touch. So if you think about, we'll use cat, you think I'm an old crazy cat lady, but I know what a cat sounds like, I know what it looks like, I know what it feels like, I know what it smells like, I guess. Those are the simple pieces of data that come through my sensory systems. Then the brain or mind combines them into complex ideas of cat. And the way it does it, some of the rules are contiguity means when things happen closely in time. Okay, when you see lightning flash, you pretty much expect to hear thunder at some point because in the past, these two things have gone together, right? Similarity, just ideas that are similar get connected. Contrast, the opposite things that are opposite get connected. Okay, there's some other secondary rules. Things that are intense, we're going to remember more often. Think of these as rules of memory. Learning and memory are the same thing. So when we're learning and associating things, it's like memory. Things that are intense, the frequency of presentation, the more often it happens, then we're more likely to remember it. Yep. previous associations. So sometimes old learning interferes with new learning, okay? They talked about that. Now, I'm not going to test you on these rules, but I want you to see how Aristotle's ideas persisted, got used, got emphasized, and really what we're looking at so far is just all the philosophy that's happened, and that's where psychological ideas stayed until we get into 1800s. Okay. So when I say what were these things and what were they combined into, that is, those things were the simple ideas that then got combined into complex ideas by the mind according to some rules, and they were trying to figure out what are these rules, okay? All right, so my next video picks up on Ebbinghaus. So I'm gonna go ahead and just stop this one here, and you can do the next two videos on Canvas, and hopefully that'll take care of the fact that we've had a lot of missed days. All right, bring your notes to class so we can clear up any answers that you didn't get. All right, see you.